Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the webinar here. I am going to just check to see who's online here. Hey, if you're online, if you could just say hello in the chat area. There's Dale's checked in. We'll just kind of wait for a few people to get checked in here. Awesome. And Ian's all the way from Australia, San Francisco. Greg says he's here. Bill's here. Wow, okay. This is the best part of this thing when I watch all these things.
Yes, how fast that goes and how everything drops off.
Yeah. So I'll mention it right now as all of you are signing in. When you submit your question, you're going to type it in just like you are your hello and good evening and all this kind of stuff here. You're going to type in your questions in that chat box there. If all of you are typing your questions in that fast, there is no way that we can keep up with you. So unlike driving fast on a track, be patient, slow down, be smooth. And if you've got a question and you see a bunch of other questions all coming in, you might just want to wait for a little bit and wait until you see the number of questions popping up, slow down a little bit, and then you can submit your questions. And my lovely assistant, Robin, will be monitoring all the questions, as I will as well. And this whole session is just a simple Q&A thing. I've got 3 of the world's most fantastic, awesome, amazing, high-performance driver education instructors specializing in lead follow instruction. Okay, and with that, Greg Hawes, and we were joking earlier on how we look like the Brady Bunch here with the 4 of us up on the screen here. But in my upper right, I don't know if that's your upper right or not, because it probably changes. In fact, it's not. I'm looking over here and it's different. But Greg Hawes, give us a wave. Greg, welcome.
Good evening.
James Bergeron from Ottawa. James, give us a wave. Say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Andrew Rains from Birmingham, Alabama. Okay. And me from Seattle. So we've sort of covered the country. And I didn't mention, Greg, you're in somewhere around Summit Point, somewhere in that area.
Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, yes.
Berkeley Springs. I'm trying to think if I've been through there. Okay. Probably.
You have.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Hey, so this whole session, you know, it sort of came out of a few weeks ago. We did a session for the Motorsport-Safety Foundation around lead follow instruction. And it was, I think, to say it was a success, I think is a little bit of an understatement in the fact that we had so much participation. We had somewhere like 800-900 people online at one time. And that just obviously shows that there's a lot of instructors out there who care about doing a great job. So first of all, thank you for doing that. Thank you for being on this. But when we left that session, we realized there was just a lot of questions out there. And so that's why we reached out to the 3 of you and asked you to join me on this Q&A session. So I think we will have some questions here soon. I actually have a question that was submitted to me by email more than once. And I'm going to throw it out there, and I'm actually going to ask all 3 of you to give your input on this. And it's kind of the most obvious question, and that question is, if I'm doing lead follow, I'm the lead instructor, I'm driving a car, I've got a student follow me, and I'm telling that student, follow me and do what I do, mimic my brake lights, mimic where I turn in the corner, do all that. Am I not teaching that student to stare at my bumper and my taillights? How do I instruct? How do I reinforce looking further ahead? Andrew, you start.
Sure.
Go alphabetical this time, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is the verbiage and how you describe lead follow to your students from the very beginning is extremely important. And if you even call it lead follow too much and you indicate that they're following you and you really emphasize that, then they might have an expectation that they're looking at your bumper. if you just use terminology like you're going to follow me like tracks in the snow or tracks in the mud, but we're going to be driving the racetrack together. And I'm going to be talking through, at least in my head, or if we have communications, I'm going to be talking to you and talking about where we're looking. But after the session, I'm going to expect you to know some of these visual cues around the track, the corner workers, some of the different landscaping points, trees, different references. And we're going to have an expectation that we're going to be looking other places than the car. I think just talking about it, using verbiage that expresses that in expectation is really important.
James, you want to throw in some thoughts?
Yeah, you pretty much took what I was going to say. Whenever we talk about it, I usually say the first session, just do what I do, and then we'll talk about it in the next session. But in the next session, before the next session starts, I ask them, can you walk me through the track right now? And they usually all say no. And then I enforce that. You need to know where you're going on the track, not just where I'm going on the track. So then ask them for the next session to make sure they're looking at visual cues, braking points, turn-in points, all those things. And they'll come back the following session and they'll be able to start walking you through the track because of that. So exactly as you said, you have to force them to look at those other things and have questions about them at the end of the session.
Great point, and I'll get to you a second here, Greg, but it's such a great point that I want to stress right now is, to me, doing lead follow instruction, when you're doing in-car instruction, all the instruction happens in that moment in the car. Whereas with lead follow, a lot of it happens before you even get onto the track and a lot of it after the fact, right? And I think when you prime somebody with a question, you say, at the end of the session, I'm going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how far ahead were you looking? It's interesting how if you just plant that question with somebody, all the time they're driving, they're going to go, oh yeah, I gotta remember that. So I think there's a lot more instructing coaching going on before and after than if you're an in-car instructor who's always just done everything in the moment. So big difference there, I think. Greg, comments on the vision part of it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has to be said is you've got to encourage the student to look through your car. As much as you're looking at the car and following, you're looking through the car at the points beyond us and still using 2 or 3 points ahead of where you are intending to go, and really keep those eyes out, very far out. Right.
Okay. Hey, before we jump into some other questions, guys, give us the 30-second bio on your experience in high-performance driver education instruction, and specifically dealing with the lead-follow style of instructing. James, go ahead.
Yeah, so specifically lead follow. Interestingly, I was an auto journalist for about 10, 15 years. So I was not the instructor for those, but I was in a lot of them. So I've seen a lot of them corporate events, and I've brought that along in my instruction for about 5 years now with Calabogie Motorsports Park. I've been doing what they call a Mustang experience, which brings just regular people off the street. We do a lead follow and they rent a Mustang, and we do that. And I've also instructed with people that are more advanced students and some that have come to the track that are say they're advanced from other tracks, and we just try and show them the track. So we've done some lead follow as well with that. Okay, cool. Greg?
Well, a lot of my background has been in a broad variety of training, a lot of in-car instructing from novices all the way up through advanced coaching, and also a lot of lead follow in different configurations. One of the neatest things has been things like close proximity and motorcade work from our BSR side. And that's when you really try to get a pack of people to work together and you talk them through coordinating.
So because you worked with at BSR, Bill Scott Racing, at
Bill Scott
some
Racing,
point, which has been around for 412 years, I think. Yeah. Hey, Andrew, your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from racing primarily. I just wanted to drive a race car fast, and then I realized I had a passion for instructing. So it started obviously kind of with right seat instructing, getting the credentials, building that up. When I went to work for the Porsche track experience based at Barber Motorsports Park here in Birmingham, I was taught how to do their lead follow process by guys that have been doing this for as long or longer than I've been alive. And so I got a lot of really intense exposure from some folks that know the ins and the outs of this industry. And so I've done a lot of lead follow in kind of an institutional program where we have a really well-oiled machine down to the minute of each day. We know what's going on, and we have a really, really strong process for lead follow from people that have never been on the racetrack to drivers that are coming back for their 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th time at these programs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I did lead follow once. That's my, actually, I think the first time I did lead follow was mid to late 80s. And so done it a few times since then. Hey, Steve asked a question that I kind of want to jump ahead here to his question, because he asked, is the earlier webinar available somewhere for those unable to attend? Yes, if you go to, and by the way, this webinar, recording of this webinar will also be there tomorrow, but if you go to motorsport-safety.org, Motorsport-Safety Foundation's website. So again, motorsport-safety.org. If you go to that website and you go to the resources page, you'll find the video from that previous webinar. You'll also find we created sort of a template of some things that an organization should think about in terms of incorporating lead follow into their curriculum. And so that's there as well as a template for hand signals that can be used when doing lead follow as well. So all of that is at motorsport-safety.org under the resources page. Okay, so I'm going to pick a question here. Larry asked, anyone put together a written template to lay out a sequence of progression for novice groups? Greg, you touched on some of this sort of organizational stuff before we got going here. Do you want to attack that question?
A little bit I can get into. Got a lot of talent in the room here. But I think that progressing with understanding your first day on the track for all of us, and knowing how much of information overload it is, and trying to make that first experience as much fun as possible, and try to get it to go smoothly for the beginning novice, and then starting to layer different elements on as they go throughout the progression. In doing lead follow, being very careful to know who your never-evers are and starting them in a group by themselves or together, and progressing up through your choices to get the more advanced groups together, so that the way the whole collection of card moves, it matches the skill of the students.
And
does that help?
Yeah. And I guess specifically to answer the question, has anyone put together a written template to lay out the sequence? I was going to say not that I'm aware of, but Andrew, do you know somebody in your area in one of the car clubs that has written a document that is pretty damn impressive?
I do.
And I don't know whether we can, it's not like we can share it, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, if Dale from PCA Peach State, I believe, is on, he definitely can help you out. So reach out to Dale. And Dale, your last name escapes me at the current moment, but it'll come to me. Great document. And
I think Doug, also a PCA down your way.
Also, yes, There's two of them. I'm sorry. Doug Neal also wrote one for the specifically for the Alabama region PCA. We weren't actually able to implement it at our most recent event due to what PCA wants to do nationally.
Yeah. So, Larry, I guess the simple answer is I don't think there is a standard one that's out there yet, but I know a lot of groups that are putting things together and sharing more. And yes, thanks, Dale, for putting your name up there, Ravenek. So
that's it. I'm sorry, Dale. I knew that.
Yes. This, I'm going to touch on something before I jump into some more questions here. One of the things, and I wrote about this recently and I said, I use the analogy of building a race car or a track car. And if you had a great car builder, and they're building a car, they wouldn't use one tool. You know, they wouldn't use like the torque wrench to build the entire car. Yeah, when it comes to torquing the head bolts or the wheel bolts, the wheel nuts, you know, maybe they'd use that torque wrench, but they'd use all sorts of other tools for that project. And I think of instructing students as a project. It's just like building a car. And it's like our job is to take that student and make them a better race car or a better track car. And you know, we need to use more than one tool. And I think a lot of us have gotten, a lot of instructors have kind of gotten into the mode of, I'll use one tool, in-car instruction. That's my torque wrench. But that torque wrench isn't the right tool all the time. And one of the cool things is in the past couple of weeks, I've heard from 3 different organizations who have started doing lead follow and are raving about the success of it, and to the point where they said, we're now going to incorporate this in all of our events going forward now. It's not something that was it's just a short-term fix. It's part of our curriculum going forward now. So interesting. Christian asked, should there be different lines for DE students and racers? Who wants to attack that one?
I certainly would like to.
Go ahead, Greg. You got it.
We work with one of our tracks is Shenandoah down at Summit Point, and Bill Scott designed it. It's a pretty devious track, and it's one of the most challenging tracks to have a consistent school line. And the line that we teach that's part of our training on whatever track is a line that I believe you can drive any vehicle on, and it's going to be safe, it's going to be fast, and it essentially gives the student a framework to build their skill on. When you start developing into competition, you are looking for a whole variety of other things out of the route around the racetrack. And it certainly does change what line you may take, depending on the situation. And you get the benefit of making those choices with skill and experience. Does that help? Is that it?
Yes, and I guess I just throw in there, this webinar is for HPDE instructors.
Right.
Not race school instructors. So
yep.
Just something to think about. Okay.
Well, it simplifies your job if it's one line that you're working with.
Yeah. We're gonna speed up here a little bit. Curtis asked, which car is best for lead? High torque, high horsepower, but goes moderate? James, you want to attack that, or anybody?
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, the fastest car that you can get. Really. Why? So that's a good question. Why? So the faster the car that you have, the easier it is to do lead follow. You go slow into the corners as you're picking up pace, and if the person behind you picks up pace, then you can pick up pace the last second, right? You don't have to accelerate out of the corner. You can coast out of the corner and wait for your student to catch up to you, and then accelerate away to maintain the distance. So it's easier the faster car you have. It just makes it a lot easier than trying to maintain. If you had a Miata and you had to maintain momentum everywhere, and you had a Lamborghini behind you, you'd never be able to do it, right? But if you've got a Lamborghini and you got a Miata behind you, way easier.
Right. Okay. Hey, Todd asked, do you use COM with students? And Andrew, do you want to touch on this? Because we've talked about this earlier. I guess, pros and cons of hand signals versus radios and all of that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, sure. Well, I think there's already great resources out there, like Ross said, for hand signals. You're probably already using some of them in your current format. I would strongly suggest, if you're transitioning from purely right seat instruction to a lead follow format, to probably avoid comms to begin with, because it's going to complicate things a lot, right? You're just going to be worried about the logistics of your event now. You're going to have to schedule in pre-session briefs and post-session debriefs, right? Whereas you might have just had 1 or 2 classrooms throughout the day. So that's going to be the biggest, most fundamental change. The program I come from, we actually hold a radio in our hands to talk, and there's a radio in the student's car. That also complicates your job as the instructor. Not only are you doing lead follow at speed on the track, you're looking in your mirrors, watching what your students are doing the whole time. You're also now you have one hand on the wheel. And I've done it in a manual transmission car as well, which is adding just, you're starting to get to a point where you need a really specialized person to do that. So I would avoid comms, really good hand signals, strong instructor alignment. Everybody's doing the same things. Simplify it.
Okay. And there's a couple other ones here. Eric asked, is there a good app out there that works like a walkie-talkie to their car? I had somebody send me something that is related to this, but is different. So one of the things, I'll bring this up right now. Somebody asked, you know, as an instructor, you're driving around, and Andrew, as you talked about, I mean, you got to be really aware of what's going on. You got to be watching your mirrors. You're going to be driving the lap. You're driving the track. You've got a lot going on. And if you look in the mirror and you go, you know, the red car is missing the apex at turn 3 every single lap. And it's 2 minutes in, 5 minutes into a 20-minute session. And you're going, how do I keep track of that? Wouldn't it be great if I could write that down? So there's an app both for Android and iPhone that is voice activated and for note taking. So you could have your phone sitting there and you could just go, 3rd lap, red car, misses apex, turn 3. And it will record that. So when you get back afterwards, you've got a little reminder of who to talk to. So I know that's a little different than the question here, but just wanted to touch on that because you've touched on the radio thing already. Todd asked, how much greater is the instruction with communication between cars during session? I think that's kind of the same thing. Do you want to, anybody want to attack that, or is that different enough?
Can you say that one more time? Can you repeat the question, please?
How much greater is the instruction with communication between cars during session? So I guess it's, you know, if you've got a radio, how much more instruction can you provide than if
I'll take it.
Okay, you got it.
So I've had the situation where I've been talking on my radio consistently around the lap and didn't realize the battery died. Everybody behind me did the exact same thing every single lap, and they were perfect. It was great. And afterwards, they didn't even say anything about it. I've also had people get out of the car and say, hey, I loved your commentary. You really gave me some things to think about. It kept me from looking at your bumper. I was looking up at the track, doing some other things. I've had it both ways. My opinion is if you're really good with the communications, your instructors are aligned, they're doing it similarly, it can add value. It's probably going to add more complication than value unless you can afford to buy radios for your organization and have everybody using the same thing, or really, really, really vet an app, but don't count on an app working.
I can speak to that too.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
We did the pace and chase. We had a lead car and we had a chase car, and the chase car was responsible for keeping the cars in line. In other words, talking to students who were offline, who were doing certain things. It allowed the pace driver to drive the line as close to perfectly as possible and maintain the speed that was necessary. But the cool thing was it let the chase car really do the talking and analysis of the cars in front of them. And I think that took down some of the overhead, and there was a debrief after the session. But I think that helped tie it all together. So there was value there doing that.
So I'll just, a couple things. I mean, one is, I think we all learned, we should have learned as an in-car instructor, sometimes the best instruction is saying nothing. As a good coach friend of mine says to me, let the silence do the talking. And sometimes we need to do that. Sometimes we're just so caught up in that, I got to tell everybody what to do all the time, that there isn't that big a problem sometimes just being a little quiet. But, and Greg, I think I'd like you to sort of talk a little bit about some of the organizational kind of stuff that you've done. And maybe Dale's question will help us lead into this. And Dale asked, at a recent event, we had typical instructors, typical is in quotations, instructors pilot several lead follow activities. It proved to be more challenging in explaining what we wanted to accomplish on track, but working the activities on track proved to be very effective. How do we communicate what we want to accomplish to our instructor corps? And I know because you've done some, I think you and James, I think have done some fairly recent instructor training around lead follow, correct? Maybe you could touch on
that. Yeah, what we did was we had a core group of instructors get together on days before the event, and we actually practiced the pace and chase packages that we wanted to use. So we had our front car, and it lined up on grid to the left at where the front of the group would be. The follow car, the chase car, was on the left at the back of the group. And we sort of got this good visual layout with the 4 student cars being on the right of the grid, so that we could see exactly what everyone's role was going to be in the process. And we got all the instructors. At first, we just used trainer cars, Crown Vics, and got them used to the movements. And then we put them in their own cars. And when everybody got in their own car, it smoothed it out dramatically because they knew exactly what their car would do. And I think that drill was really important to make the rest of the events go well. And once they spoke to the other instructors who filled out the core for the actual event, everything came together really nicely. So
it brings up an important point here. And, you know, Andrew, you talked about when you went to work for the Porsche driving experience, you know, you got trained. Greg, you're talking about a separate day to train your instructors. I think, James, you've had instructor training sessions where you've been able to do that. Some organizations are pretty limited to their ability to prepare instructors. Guys, got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can step in on that. So we actually took some kind of more experienced instructors when we started the Lead Follow program this year. And we didn't have a training day per se, as in we got out on the track and did anything. We just kind of talked about it. We sent out a document. So we wrote up a document that had things in it, you know, what you should do in the first session with your student, what you should talk about with the students after that first session, what you should do in the second session, what you should do in the third session, and kind of progression you'd expect with a student over the sessions. And we also had in that document how the instructor should be driving and what they should be expecting from their driving in the session, ramping up the pace, and you know, and what they should be looking for in their mirrors and things like that. So having that information there, if you can't actually get together and do a training session, having something written down that people can read over and have notes with them at the track to follow, right?
And so perfect leads into Patrick's question of how would you determine the best pace to drive at? Obviously, you don't want to outpace the students, but you also don't want to go too slow. How would you determine the best pace? Follow on there. We'll let James finish it first, and then.
Yeah, so usually I just ask them what their experience is. Even if they tell me they've been a Formula One driver for 10 years, I start off slow. I start off, you know, I come out of the pit lane at 50 kilometers an hour or 30 miles an hour, and I drive that first lap like they've never seen the track before, even if they said they have. And I just slowly bring up the pace, and I ask the students behind me, if you keep the same distance behind me and keep with my pace, I'll go faster. If you fall back, I'm going to slow down. So I just keep bringing up the pace a little bit every corner as we go through, and just keep adding pace until they start backing off a little bit. And it seems to work well.
And one of the great things about what you just said there, if somebody is falling back, you slow down. Because every now and then you're going to get somebody who goes, you know what, if I just hang back here, I can get a big run through this corner. Well, you don't have to have down to them. They can't do that. So great way of managing the traffic there too. Greg, do you want to follow on there?
Yeah, and I think I have to agree. That's absolutely true. And what you find is by monitoring what's going on behind and basically adjusting speed, the speed tends to grow organically to match the student's capabilities. And it's pretty neat. And the more comfortable they get with the process, especially if you keep the same group together, the speed tends to match what's going to help them learn best.
Yep. Dwayne asked a question, and I'll throw this to you, Andrew. How do we monitor or teach hand speed or brake pressures in this? For instance, I was instructing at Road Atlanta and was having a tough time figuring out how to tell if my student was turning in slow for a fast turn, like turn 1, versus a faster turn in for a slower turn, turn 7.
Yeah, really, I mean, tough question, right? Because you're not sitting in the seat next to him, and you're probably used to sitting in the seat next to him. I would go back to this comes to where your experience doing this and your awareness is critical, because you would be really surprised, really surprised once you do this a bunch, how much you can pick up on in your mirror with just the driver behind you. So it depends on the format as well. If you have one driver behind you, you can spend a lot of time, and you're going to be able to see hand input, right? You're going to be able to see steering input. You also need to be able to see when the front tires are understeering, right? Right. If they pop off the brake pedal and they go straight to the gas and they got a lot of steering input in it and the front end's off the ground and the tires are sliding, you can assume that their brake release is not very good, right? They're popping off. They're going back to too much throttle. You can really see that stuff. At least in my experience, that's something that I became aware of, and it didn't happen on the first day. And the attitude of the car, essentially.
Yeah, a great point. And I think no one's going to pick that up the first time they're doing this. But with a little experience, it's actually pretty surprising how much you can see just in watching the attitude of the car. And you'll pick up, the hand speed a little bit on the wheel, but you just watch the attitude of the car and you can learn an awful lot. So
are they turning their head or not?
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Big one.
Huge one, yes. Actually, a great point. Watching in your mirror and watching whether the driver's turning their head. So here's an interesting question Bill asked. I don't know which Bill, but how do instructors get encouraged to drive their car? Extra miles, wear and tear, etc. In that situation, and some of you may have school cars, Porsche, BSR, the Mustang thing, but some car clubs, the instructors show up and they're expected to drive their own cars. Any thoughts?
Yes, we did it, and the instructors seem to enjoy driving a lot. They enjoy driving their cars, and interestingly, a lot of times it's not as hard on the car as perhaps full-on instructor session laps would be. But I think everybody seemed to enjoy quite a bit the time that they got on track.
Yeah, I think that, thought about the right way, it is a fantastic learning opportunity for the instructor, because now you're driving your car not at at the limit like you often would be. So you're kind of slowed down a little bit. You're paying attention to all the little details. So you're kind of fine tuning those things at that lower speed. So it's a great learning opportunity. That's how I would pitch it anyways.
Yeah. Ross, real quick on that, I think the super easy, pitch to get people on board and how you pitch it is, well, normally and during this same time frame, you would be sitting in the right seat. And now you are sitting in the comfort of your own car on the racetrack, getting extra laps, picking up things that you won't pick up at full speed in a full-on session, and you'll probably get value out of it, just like you said.
And as you said, Greg, it's not as hard on the car, so it's not a huge wear and tear on the car. Might use some gas.
Yeah.
Tim asked, sorry, I want to go back to this one. Actually, Mike asked, and this is a good one. When is lead follow a better learning experience for a student than in car? I could go on a long time here, so I'm going to go ahead. Who wants to take this one first?
Okay, I'll go.
Okay.
One of the places that it's fantastic is, especially on a busy track, the student is not worrying quite as much about memorizing or learning the line, because a lot of times that can take a great deal of overhead that perhaps should be used on being comfortable with track driving, being better with your operation of the car, having fun. And we found a lot of students really enjoyed being able to do multiple laps pretty close to the ideal line and get settled in really well and comfortable with what the line looked like. And that made it a tremendous learning opportunity for them. And I think they learned a lot that you may spend quite a few sessions learning otherwise.
And then I'll throw in something here. It's just, I think that we believe that people only learn by being told what to do. And yet, think about the greatest learning experiences you've ever had in your life. A lot of them were as you kind of figured things out, where maybe somebody guided you a little bit, but you figured things out on your own, and those things stuck with you forever. And I think lead follow can provide that, and often does provide that. So kind of getting out of the mindset of, well, the only way that people learn is being told. I think that's a big part of it. How many times have you, as an in-car instructor, have you spent a number of sessions with a student, and then you got out of the car and let them solo, and after they come back and they go, wow, that was fantastic to be out there on my own, to really kind of think about things and put things together. So you're really asking them to do that a little bit more from the very beginning, and it works. So, hey, Tim asked, how does this play with instructing advanced students? For instance, teaching end of braking zone techniques.
Great. Works really well. I guess I'll go for that one.
Do you want to expand on that, Andrew? Or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, kind of dovetailing on the last question, teaching what we call the line, or the way around the track, essentially not using the lanes that we have to use on the road, right? Radius equals speed, all that kind of stuff. Lead follow is really the way to do it, because one session behind the lead car, and they're going to know where they need to put the car on the track. That's going to answer that question. How many times have you sat in the classroom trying to explain, and people go, hey, where do you put the car right before you turn into this turn? And then you're not actually talking about the same turn even sometimes, right? So lead follow answers those questions. Going into advanced driving, the other beauty of lead follow is they can see where your brake lights illuminate and then again cease to be illuminated, right? So if you're trying to teach EOB, end of brake, if you're a good advanced driver, right, and you're instructing another advanced driver, the conversation is, hey, in these couple of turns that we're looking at, watch my brake lights, watch when they come off, watch the attitude of my car, watch how little my front tires actually have to turn to make it through the corner. Try to pick up on some of those nuances. And just remember, just to do lead follow with an advanced student doesn't mean you have to be going out there turning really fast laps either. Set the expectation with them that because you're doing lead follow, you're watching your mirrors and you're trying to help them as well, right? So you're going to be going at a manageable pace, but it's a really good experience, and you can probably leapfrog and learn from them as well. So that's how I would approach it with an advanced driver.
Okay, cool. Joe asked, can you walk through signaling for faster groups passing? And what I'm assuming here, that's the, you're out there with you're leading a group of 1 or 2 or 3, whatever students, and there's another group of lead follow coming up on you that's a little faster. James, how do you guys handle that?
We just roll through pit lane. That's just the easiest way to do it. We talked about maybe doing it on the long straight, moving the whole group over. It's just too complicated. So it's just easier. We roll through pit lane. The lead group rolls through pit lane. So we do have radios, instructor to instructor, but I've done it without radios. And if you're on the ball, if I got 4 cars behind me and now all of a sudden there's 5, well, then that other group has caught me, right? So then the next time I get to pit lane, I just roll through and then come out right behind them after. So that works for us.
Yeah. Greg?
That's absolutely true. That is what works best. And
okay.
Very good.
Okay. Jacob asked, and it's kind of it's awesome. It's would emulate or reference, and I think what he's saying is using the word emulate or reference rather than follow, since they infer a thoughtful attempt to imitate. That's kind of a cool way of looking at it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Yep.
So thanks, Jacob. We've stolen that from you.
Yeah. A reference car. I grew up in the video game era, so I would call it the ghost car.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Fred asked, any advice on instructing more than one student, maybe 1 on 2 or 1 on 3 instructor-student ratio? And Greg, I know you guys do up to And I think there's some more questions about that. But you run groups of how many?
Well, we ran four students in a group.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-to-1 instructor-student ratio, and that seemed to work very well, even with a traditional emulate lead emulate. The 4 cars is still a good number because it does allow you to keep that group together. Any more than that, it starts to get a little straggled out. But so you can keep track of 4 students pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, there's some people say, well, if that's that 4th car in line, it's kind of that, keeps getting a little bit worse, and a little bit worse, and a little bit worse.
Well, there's a solution.
Okay.
And what we found worked best was there was one spot on the track that made for the cleanest rotation, if you will. And the lead car would pull off line as if a pit in, complete with a pit in signal. 3 cars would pass, and then it would drop in behind the other 3 cars. And if we did it every lap, we didn't even really need to call for that, because it was simply part of the lap. And if you pick the right spot, you don't really lose a whole lot on the lap itself.
Yeah.
So that way everybody gets a bit of the follow.
So you kind of rotate through. So everybody's the car immediately behind the lead instructor car, but also 2nd car in line, 3rd car in line. And again, I think that being the last car in line, there's that, I get to figure this out on my own a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's value there. James?
Yeah, so we do maximum 4 cars. And as you said, like that last car does learn a little bit because I always call whenever I talk to my students, I call it like the telephone game, right? The younger, the telephone game, but the telephone, everything just gets worse as it goes along, right? So you got to get, and like you said, and we talked about this earlier about, slowing down to get that pack together. But the one thing that Greg mentioned was, doing that rotation. We started off only doing the rotation in one spot on the front straight on the track. Our track's pretty long, so that could be, 3 minutes, and it's 20 corners, so it's a long track. So we started adding other places, doing like HPDE, where this is our 5 passing zones, and I'm going to give the group a point by in one of those 5 passing zones, and we're just going to switch it up every lap. And once in a while, maybe twice in a lap, but we're try not to slow down the group too much, right? Which is the key. You want to keep that pace up the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other, sorry.
No, go ahead, Greg.
One of the benefits of being the 4th car is that we talked earlier about the ocular training and your eyes. And if you're the 4th car, you're actually looking up a long row of cars at the pace car at where it's driving. And so you kind of by necessity have to get your eyes stretched out and look through the other 3 cars in front of you.
Plus, I would say there's something about being that 4th car in line, whereas you approach a corner, it's almost like the dot of the cars in front of you. So now you can visualize this line through the corner because the cars are lining up for you in front of you. So it's actually, it helps you with the vision, I think, as long as you just keep reminding yourself to look far enough there. So great stuff, guys. Question, are there common hand signals for clubs without the ability to have radios between cars? And I'd just say, big part of it is just establish it, write it down. But if you go to Motorsport-Safety's website, and again, go to the resources page, there is a standard hand signals that the MSF is recommending, and more organizations are adopting that as kind of the standard, and maybe slightly different than what you've done in the past, but it does make it easier if somebody goes from one organization event to another one and they're consistent. So I would recommend going to MSF's website and using that. Next question. I really feel that there is a balance of using lead follow and in-car instruction. What is your opinion? How much of each for an HPDE event? Great question. Come on.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and I would just say, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier is lead follow is one tool, you know, in-car is one tool. The best way to approach a project is to use the best tool for the job. You know, if you're cutting something, don't use a hammer.
Well, and one of the things I just noticed a question about passing, and we've got a couple of events where I've built schedules that blend traditional in-car instruction with a couple of lead follow sessions during the day.
Yeah.
And in the morning, the lead follow will help everybody warm up and get to see the track, get comfortable, get settled in with a car. Not a long session, but then after training and track time in the morning, traditionally after lunch, then the instructors go out and they can show the students the line again, and everyone will have a fresh view of it and kind of reinforce things they may have learned during the morning. So it's a blend of the two techniques.
Yeah, Again, we shouldn't be thinking about it as there's only one way. It's a blend of all these things. So it will make a better learning experience for our students. Hey, Andrew, how about answering Scott's question of how do we keep the experience fun for students when, say, one student progresses faster than another and is ready for a quicker pace?
Yeah, excellent question, Scott. That's something that we do at the Porsche Track Experience, regularly, right? We're kind of profiling and mixing and matching groups to get everybody in a group that works for them. And I have to say they've really perfected that process. I think the keys are when you're doing that. One, when you don't know much about them, you're going to have to probably move people with types of cars into similar groups, right? Similar types of cars in an HPDE environment, you're probably going to want them to be in similar groups. Consider automatic versus manual transmissions and learning curve there for first timers. As a student progresses, per your question, Scott, and they get faster, it's really important to kind of assess that, how much faster are they getting? Are they considerably quicker than everyone else in the group? And they really need to either be soloed or maybe have a breakout instructor that takes them on their own. That's for you to decide. But I would always have an instructor on the bench that you could do what we call a breakout session, where you pull them off the bench and you say, you prep them, you say, hey, Scott over here is really, really quick. He's gotten really fast. He's getting a little anxious because he's in our group and want to make sure he's having a good experience. So can you just, carry him at a slightly quicker pace than he's been doing, and give him some tailored, personalized kind of experience. You have to be careful with doing that too, because you don't want everyone to expect that that's going to happen. And you have to do it subtly so that you don't call too much attention to it and everybody goes, why is he special? Right. So there's an art to it. It's not an easy answer. But if you're blending lead follow or lead reference or an in-car instruction, that might be when you put him, you take him from lead follow and you let him do some in-car stuff sooner. Right. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And
there are three other questions that are kind of similar or related in some ways. And James, you talked about it before we got going here, but Larry had asked, what about different skill level groups on track at the same time? Ron had asked, what about the safety of passing? I will have 2 students in beginner and intermediate. Chris asked, how do you manage different abilities of the various students on the track at the same time? Is there passing? And James, you touched on before we got going today about the time you guys spend getting the groups right and matching up groups of drivers with cars and instructors and all that stuff. Can you cover that?
Yeah, just ask drivers to send basically a driving resume, right? Have you done autocross before? Have you done go-karting before? Have you been on a racetrack before? Those kinds of things to know, to have some kind of reference if they're brand new novices, and then also ask them about their car. And so you can have fast drivers in slow cars, right? And you can have slow drivers in fast cars and vice versa. So you have to kind of try to figure out how to get those groups together so that they can still have fun during the whole event, right?
And I would say most of the organizations that I've been around, they do a very good job of matching up cars, drivers, instructors, and stuff like that. But, if the only option you have is lead follow, you might have to just spend a little bit more time focusing on that and just making that, fine-tuning that just a little bit more. because you don't quite have that same flexibility. So
yeah, this is a grid that we put together before the event, and it just basically matches people and cars and everything for just that reason.
Yeah. So got to do a little bit more prep work up front, maybe, if that's the only way that you have. So,
well, and one follow-up part to that real quick is, to answer what we've talked about, you move people up to different groups as well. If you've got a standout driver or a slower driver, you can move them up and down the range to maximize their benefit.
Yeah. So there's a question here that we are not going to answer, but here it is. The question is, can we get PCA National to change the rule of windows down changed? Nope, we're not going to answer that one. Here's a good one. In addition to pace, how close should you tell the student to follow? Distance has to vary with speed, but how do you communicate that?
I think we touched upon that on the last webinar, right? They talked about have the cars lined up before, and have the driver sit in the car and see a visual of that distance. We talked about 2-3 car lengths. We're actually changing it to 2 calibogies. So count 2 calibogies, and then
1 calibogie, 2 calibogie.
Yeah. To keep your pace.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 seconds. In our previous webinar, Bill Wade talked about 3 car lengths, and one of the things that they do at NCM with the Corvette program is when they're in the classroom, I think they've got a Corvette emblem up somewhere on the wall or something, and they have everybody stand back and go, see that distance right there? That's how far I want you to be from the rear of my car when we're driving around. So, and the other example is, as you said, while the cars are sitting in the paddock or in pit lane, get them spaced out. That distance that you want them to be, approximately 3 car lengths, is a pretty good place to start. And kind of have the person go, see that visual reference? That's where you want to be. So it's a good place to go.
On that, Ross, real quick.
Yeah.
Make sure to explain what a car length is. I've done that many times. 3 car lengths, and people look at me like, they're not used to that term, right? We watch races. We've been doing this for a long time. That is the length of the car. Imagine there are 3 cars parallel parked between your car and the pace car. Make it very, very, very clear, because you'll be surprised. There'll be people that have done events that will still not understand that, and it's just a verbiage thing, right? Just a verbiage thing.
And we're talking 3 smart cars and not 3 Lincoln Continentals, right?
Right. Yeah. That's good to define as well.
Yeah, might want to kind of, okay. And this is, I think, a follow-up Mike asked, how do you tell when a student will learn more in lead follow over in-car? That's a really good question. I got some thoughts, but go ahead. Who wants that one? Come on. Okay. I'm going to say when a student, that moment when you're in car and you're going, they've got it. They can talk me around the track. And that's kind of a cue as to when you're going to start to be quiet in the car. So the same kind of thing happens in a lead follow situation. I think when a driver is, you can tell they've got the basic idea, they're understanding what's going on. And again, one of the things I talked about early on is much more of the coaching instruction goes on before and after. So if you have the conversation and you say, did you notice the way the car went through turn 3 and you were a little early on the apex? What happened? And the driver goes, oh yeah, I turned in a little early there. I know that I should have been turning in at the end of the curbing. And what I did was I turned in before the end of the curbing. I apexed a little early and I had to get out of the throttle or I would have driven off the track. That driver right there would learn more from lead follow than you sitting in the car and say, you turned in too early. That's because they're at the point where they're starting to figure it out on their own. Tom asked, how can we evaluate promotion criteria from novice to solo without ever sitting right seat?
Well, in the format of the lead follow event, we take a student out in the solo group and follow that student with an instructor. And if the student is ready, the instructor can simply follow that student, watch what they're doing, and know from how they're going around the track and how they're lapping that they're going to be comfortable in the solo group. And that's one way to do it.
So it becomes more of a follow lead.
Right.
And you're evaluating from that perspective. And I would say, again, if you're having conversations with them out of the car and you're asking questions, which I think we should do more of, if you're asking questions and they're coming back with very thoughtful answers, that's a good sign too. If the answers are, well, I drive that line because that's the line that the instructor in front of me is driving, they're probably not ready to solo. Peter asked, how slow do you start novice students? How slow for mid-level students? How do you manage student progression with varying cars and understanding of lead follow?
I think James kind of hit on the pacing really well earlier. I mean, it's really, you know, it depends how you define novice. If novice is first time at the racetrack, you're going to start really slow. And the best way to do that is to have some empathy and put yourself in that position and pretend that you've never seen the racetrack before. And that's really hard to do, but putting a speed limit on yourself might help. Right? It's at 60 miles per hour, whatever it is. But you're going to progressively add speed. The students are going to get faster without even noticing that they're getting faster at first. They're going to become more comfortable. They're going to get used to the track and used to everything else, right? So it's just a matter of how you build that progression. There's not a defined set way to do it, and that's why it comes back to having instructors that are trained to do it. If you're trained properly by somebody that's done this before, or somebody that has a good understanding of how this process works, then you'll have that in place naturally.
And going back to what James said earlier is, you know, if the student can't keep up to you, ease off. You know, kind of work to their pace as opposed to us setting the pace. We may want to start with that, but then we've got to adapt our pace to the student. If somebody is like really seems easily staying with us, you might want to pick the speed up just a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
Question, and I'm going to start to get into the lightning round here because we're getting close on our 1 hour limit, but I know we're going to go slightly over. Would it be beneficial to use a chase car that has video?
Sure.
Yes. Sure.
Yep. If you have time built into your schedule to be able to use that tool, just remember that we're bound by time, and we're already doing something different logistically at our DE. So now if you're asking an instructor or a classroom instructor to add that extra part of their game, just have that in mind, right? You might not have the logistics. It doesn't matter what kind of camera it is, there's going to be some difficulty getting it to display. Just assume there's going to be technology problems.
Lucas asked, when is a good time to plan to have the lead follow switch roles, you in back and student in front, if it is a good idea at all?
If you're analyzing the student.
Say again, Greg?
If you're analyzing what the student is doing and letting them sort it out on their own, it can be good, it can be helpful.
So when you're starting to realize that they're able to do a lot of this on their own, and now you kind of want to check how they're doing as opposed to guiding them, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Benas, what are your tips on pacing? How fast are you driving, and what is the distance you were shooting for? I think we covered that. Distance, 3 car lengths, 2 calabogies. Everybody's going to go, what's a calabogie? It is an awesome racetrack in Ottawa that is just way cool place. Valerie asks, how do you ensure your hand signals are clearly visible to your student when they're behind you? Any thoughts there?
Make them clear.
Make them clear.
Put your arm way out.
Yeah, put your arm way out. We're
using a bright glove, so we've got, wear a red glove or an orange glove or something on your hand.
Yep, I agree. Yep. Ralph had asked, do you change students and try to match them in groups of similar pace? I think we've touched on that. Yes, very important, and a big part of that happens before we even get going. Can you discuss how to handle offs and crashes in lead follow, please? Good question. Who wants to cover that? Jump into that.
I can cover it. So hopefully it never happens, is what I always tell my students. But we tell if somebody crashes, you stay in your car, and we pit the group. Depending on how your organization work is, we pit the lead car will pit. If we're the only one out there, the instructor car will go out and make sure the student's okay. Or if we have radios and safety, will go out. If they just spun, we usually see it in our mirrors. So we slow down and we tell a student, if you just spun and you only hit pavement, just keep going. If they go on the grass course, we want to check to see if there's any grass in their wheels or anything like that. So we'll just pit in on the next, we'll slowly pit in kind of thing. So it kind of same safety things you would normally do, right? Basically consider it a black flag and then come on in and ask your student, what happened.
Right. Okay. Jim asked, one of my top priorities is to get a new student to call out corner workers and all flags. How do you accomplish this with lead follow?
Track map afterwards.
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah, just hand them a track map and tell them to draw the corner worker stations. I mean, that's a standard practice with a lot of groups. I did that this past weekend on a check ride for a student. I think that's pretty representative. Granted, it's not while you're in car at speed, but if they can translate it to the two-dimensional track map, that's a really good sign. And usually a good student that's going to advance that can point them all out on the track can also do that.
I think in some ways it's even better because the fact that they wrote it down, it's going to stick with them. I've had students who drive around the track could tell me, oh, there's one. But if I ask them afterwards, where are they? They can't. So I think it's actually more valuable. Jim also asked what to do if a student just isn't comfortable staying close, no matter how slow you get. Greg?
You have to work with what their pace is. You can do one of two things. You can work with them at a farther distance back and adjust what your speed and what you're doing is, or you can have them leave the group and get another instructor to drive with them and work with the pace they like on a one-on-one basis.
Kind of like what Andrew was talking about.
Exactly.
Having that spare on the bench instructor who can deal with that.
Yes,
yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, good point. Isn't there a limit to how many cars can be in the group following? With just 3 people in line, how does the third guy know whether or not the second guy in front of him is driving the line or braking properly? I think we've sort of covered that. Again, I think it's the prepping, it's the briefing up front and the debriefing afterwards that really helps deal with that. James?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we didn't really cover was there is more briefing in a lead follow, especially in HPDE environment, than there is in-car. Because when you're sitting in the car, you're telling your student, you're not just telling them when to turn. They may ask you questions, you're doing other things, you're talking about track dynamics a little bit. You're going through all these things when you're in the car. You can't do that in lead follow. So you're going to spend a lot of time before the next session talking to your students and asking them questions. So make sure you have a lot of time, and you're not going to have time to hop in your car and drive by yourself because you're going to be doing a lot of talking if you're really there for the students.
Agreed. I think that's huge, and it really is. You have to spend time before and after more than ever before.
Yes.
Bill asked, how do you handle cars in a group that might require different lines, brake points, etc., i.e. front-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive? I'm going to answer that and just say, guys, it's not that big a difference. Like if somebody says, well, it's a front-wheel drive car, I got to change the way I turn in. Guess what? You're a little beyond the HPDE stage at that point. I think Ralph asked, after 3 years of in-car coaching, having a hard time imagining lead follow more than one-on-one. How do you handle 2 to 3 cars? I think we've covered that as well, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
Jackson, if you have more than one student following you, how do you order them? Do you have well, first of all, how do you order them? It doesn't really matter in some ways because you're going to rotate through them all as well. They're all going to spend time right behind you, second, third car in line. So it almost doesn't matter, right? Okay.
Agreed.
Jim asked, after a group pass, what is the hand signal to remind the student their flashers are still on? I don't know. What's that?
I think because they're talking about put your 4 ways on and then do a group pass. Just go through pit. just easier.
Yeah. Okay. And we're getting down to the last couple, and then we're going to wrap it up here. Levi asks, driver progression. Student without instructor in car is going to gain more and more speed while instilling bad habits. Not necessarily, but okay. Confidence and speed with little foundation. How do you recognize and break bad habits without video or data? And how can you instruct what to do at or over the limit without being in the car? I can almost answer that with, well, everything we've talked about.
Yeah, rewatch webinar.
Yeah. No, and it's a really great point in that, you know, the one thing that, you know, there are pros and cons with all of this stuff, right? The one thing that you cannot do is you cannot look over and watch the brake release. You cannot see them resting their hand on their shifter. You know, like there are some bad habits that we can see more easily when we're in the car. And yeah, that's just, you know, we can't do that. However, there's a lot of other things we can do. And again, I think to the points that were made earlier on, that if you're really aware, you can pick up on a lot of that. You know, you're just going to notice in the mirror that, why do I only ever see one hand on the steering wheel? You know, why do I see the front end of the car pop up in the air as they get to the end of at the turn-in point? You know, that kind of thing. So any other thoughts on that one?
I think you mentioned it several times, but if we're imagining a world where you know, the global pandemic is subsiding and we're coming up with ways to be able to deal with that as a society, and we can also do in-car instruction, there's no reason we can't combine the two of them and get the best of both worlds. So I really think that this conversation is more about how do we use them both together to create a better student, in which case you're using lead follow for teaching them how to get around the track, where they're braking, where they're releasing the brakes, what the attitude of the car should look like in the corner, how to manage maybe those close quarters traffic situations, and some passing drills and all sorts of stuff will lead follow. And then you hop in the car and make sure they're not rally shifting the thing, right? You know?
Yeah. Don asked, any suggestions on how we handle classroom training for beginners? Great question.
We've been doing the same classroom, but we're doing it outside, and we're each instructor with the group. So that way we can kind of keep it safe and not ever have 30 people in a room.
Okay. And I guess the only other thing could touch on that would be, do you spend some time in the classroom explaining the procedures for lead follow?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that a lot of drivers need more kind of reminding of how this procedure is going to work. And so if it's introduced in the classroom and then you go through it with your student or students in the paddock, and then you go and do it, and then you debrief it afterwards, it builds it. So if it can be introduced in the classroom, that's a good thing. Steve asked, would you change your approach for adverse conditions? Heavy rain at Mid-Ohio, for instance.
Lead follow is great for the rain, right? Because it's very hard to explain what you're going to do in the rain. But if you're able to interpret the grip level while you're driving, right, and you're able to show people just how much slower you have to go in the corner, right, then lead follow is still pretty effective. I've done a bunch of lead follow in the wet, and I did not have any issues.
Yeah, it worked great, I think. And the one good thing about it is you can demonstrate that rain line and how different it is than the traditional theoretical line, so dry line. Tom asked, and I'll just quickly answer this one, is it correct that PCA National is not allowing lead follow? Will it be resolved? No instruction at PCA events unless in car, no instruction at all. As of this moment in time, my understanding is PCA National is not allowing lead follow, but it is being evaluated. That's my understanding. Okay. And Kevin asked, do repeat and/or returning students get tired of lead follow by the third or fourth weekend? I'm going to say no. Any other? Not if you're doing your job.
Right.
Yeah. The key is having well-trained instructors again. And I saw a comment about how do you train instructors if you don't have those resources, if you don't have access to the track. There's really subtle things, like if you ask people to do some intentional things on the road, drive around with somebody that they know behind them, right, and try to pick up on some of the nuances of what they're doing. Drive the same area on the road that is not very populated, and just try to get a really good sense for your mirrors and what you're supposed to be looking at, and really think about driving that same approach and that same line on the racetrack while you're looking in your mirrors 50% of the time or more. That's a good start.
Mm-hmm.
So could we? I'm going to kind of ask you guys to kind of wrap this up a little bit with that point of, as an instructor, this is challenging to do, and it does take some practice. Just some general or some specific thoughts on just what you're talking about, Andrew, of how you've got to be watching your mirrors, paying attention to what you're doing, mimicking what you want them to do. Even if you're driving slow, you have to brake at the same place and release the brakes at the same place because they're matching their braking off of you. Any other comments there?
Well, you have to recognize as a driver, an instructor, what your overhead is. And you've got to take advantage of things you do naturally without thinking about it a whole lot, and put that autopilot, if you will, or that regular knowledge of the track in play. And you need to focus on the individual students because they're different every time. So it's just a matter of where you decide to put your attention.
Yeah. James?
Yeah. I want to say it's not easy. If you've not done it before, you're basically never looking forward. You're always looking backwards. And if you have different students, you have to watch. If different cars, especially, you're going to have to watch. Is that front wheel drive car understeering, where the rear wheel drive car is oversteering? You have to watch these things, and it's a lot of work. You should be able to drive the track without looking at it. That's what I've noticed, anyways.
Well, and I would say that what a great opportunity as an instructor to learn to be a better driver and instructor. Yeah. I again wrote something recently that the coaching that I do today, like the one-on-one coaching that I work with, a pro race driver, I could not be the coach that I am had I not done a lot of lead follow, because that lead follow taught me so much about that awareness and watching the subtleties of the car and everything. So, you might kind of go, well, this doesn't seem like it's going to work. Think about it, turn it around. It's a huge opportunity. It's fantastic. Yeah. And it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple other things here. I'm not going to, one of them was kind of related to a specific organizer, how they do something. But one last thing is just best practices to incorporate video in novice instruction. Anything, guys?
I don't think you need video for novices. Wait until they start to, if they can drive on their own, then you start looking at the video.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of, because you're going to spend so much time, talking to them, I'm not sure you're going to have time to look at the video. So,
you'd much rather be driving.
Yeah.
Driving or the debrief afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you're asking the right questions, if you're getting, saying how far ahead were you looking, on a scale of 1 to 10, how smooth were you with the brake release? How smooth were you with your turn in? How much of the track were you using? Asking all of these questions, I think, is, you spend more time doing that. It's amazing how effective that could be. Any last comments, guys?
I'll just reiterate what Greg and James said. It's not easy to do it well, and you have to be intentional about how you practice it, and don't be afraid to go out and audit your instructors that you're training to do lead follow. Get somebody that's done lead follow before, that's within your organization or that you know of, and reach out to the community and find somebody that can come to your group and follow a guy around the track and make sure his brake lights are doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Right? Make sure he's able to see you the whole time. Yeah. Invest a little bit of time in doing that.
James, anything?
Actually, he just mentioned something very interesting. We do for the MSF course, we do all those, different exercises, and you can do those same exercises with lead follow. And as the student, if I'm driving and I'm missing every apex, well, then you can go back and ask the instructor, did you notice me missing, where was I missing this apex and that? So you can evaluate an instructor that way.
Yeah, great point. Greg?
Yeah, and I think that if you're doing the lead, if you actually envision what your car looks like, so that everywhere you put the car and everything you do, and you're touching the brake switch, you're not actually braking a lot of times. But if you can envision that you are essentially trying to do a perfect lap every time for the students to aspire to, as an instructor, that's a great exercise.
Yeah, great point.
Awesome.
Hey, everybody. This, again, a recording to this will be put up onto the Motorsport Safety Foundation's website tomorrow. The previous one was there. And by the way, this is going to become a somewhat regular process. We're going to be doing more webinars for the Motorsport Safety Foundation. We'll have different guests on at different times, but this is, MSF is a resource. So encourage you to go to motorsport-safety.org. And Greg, James, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's cool that you're giving back to the sport, but I also say thank you to all of you who have been on this tonight, because you're taking the time to be a better instructor, and that's really cool. That's a commitment that is cool to see. So thanks, everyone. As I always say, keep learning and keep having fun.